who is there, but hello, my name is Benico Mason, and I don't know if you can see me. I don't see myself on the screen, so I don't know if you can see me. But
Yes, we can see you.
okay, oh good, okay. Um, the title of the talk today is optimal instruction in story listening and guided self-selected reading. We think that's optimal instruction. And I will explain why we think this is the optimal instruction. And the title, another title is Optimizing Teaching and Language Acquisition. Okay, first, when Taipei University uh, gave me the title, it was language learning, but Dr. Gratian changed it to acquisition. Okay, so let's go to the next page. How do I do this? Next page. Oh, here it is. Okay. Now, this is important part of the optimal instruction. We need to know what the goal of the instruction is, and the goal is not to help them become perfect or anything like that. The goal is to develop autonomous acquirers of second foreign languages. That is to bring students to the point where they no longer need us and can continue to improve on their own. This is what Dr. Krashen said 30 years ago, and he still says this is correct. So I think this is correct too. Now, optimal input hypothesis. Um, Optimal input contains more than some comprehensible input. Compelling, rich, and abundant input. The reason why I brought this out to him a few years ago was that he talked about it in 1982 in his book, and also he talked about rich input. Well, he didn't say it that way. He said the students should not be studying according to the schedule of the textbook, you know, and which means when they study according to the schedule of the textbook, the input is not rich. And I also pointed out any methodology contains comprehensible input. And he agreed with me. And comprehensible input is a very vague term because I don't know if it's a vague term, but um, uh, because everything contains comprehensible input. When we are doing a traditional approach, when we are studying intensive reading, and when we are doing exercises on different grammatical structure, we are understanding what we are doing. We understand what we read when we do the exercises. We understand, and so everybody gets comprehensible input. It's not possible to not get comprehensible input when you're in school because teacher tries to make everybody understand whatever he wants the students to understand. So comprehensible input is not enough, and uh, and also not all comprehensible input is of equal value. Some comprehensible input is really good, rich and abundant and all that stuff. But some comprehensible input is very impoverished. Okay, so the optimal input hypothesis assumes that we acquire only from input, not from output. And I just love this part because he insists this, and I do too. Um, we acquire. Now, the other day, I was interviewed by someone, and he asked me, what would you say to teachers if the teacher says, well, but reading and listening are not enough. We gotta have somebody else do it. When they say things like that, they are not comprehensible input teachers. They call themselves CI teachers, but if they are CI teachers, they have to go along with this. We acquire only from input and not from output. Okay. You ask me questions later, okay? I'll be interested in knowing what you think. The optimal input hypothesis. A popular assumption is that any method will work as long as it contains some comprehensible input. And that's why we can teach songs, put on a play, and lead the students in exercises because they all involve some comprehension of messages. But this is not correct. Story listening GSSR is optimal input. Story listening and guided self-selected reading provide optimal input, and I'll explain why it can provide optimal input gradually in this talk. The hypothesis is that story listening GSSR supply what is needed for efficient and pleasant language acquisition. Optimal instruction is the core is optimal input. That means, it's not that you cannot teach grammar. You cannot talk about it a little bit. You cannot, it's not like you cannot have them do a little bit of exercises, but it's not, we don't trust it. That might help some students think like, they are getting something out of it, but the core is optimal input. And this another thing is very important. Optimal input plus supporting conditions. Now, this supporting conditions makes the affect filter low. And that's why it's very important. And I will talk to you about what supporting conditions are in a few minutes. Contents of this presentation is what is optimal input, what in story listening helps provide optimal input. Story listening is a bridge to reading. This is correct. I know. I never knew this, but this I have found out. I think for foreign language students, like in my case, I only know Japanese students who are studying English as a foreign language, but they must listen to stories. They have to go through story listening if we want them to become good readers. Start reading in English. But anyway, 3 steps for story listening GSSR. I will talk about that. And why support a delayed gratification approach? Dr. Krashen says, why do we have to have them wait, and they never get to the point, they never get to their goal. And so why do we support the delayed gratification approach to teach English or to teach another language? Success and pleasure lead to motivation. So this is also a very important part. Lots of people talk about motivation, like, if you have a boyfriend or girlfriend, you like to study the language. Or if you want to go to that country, you want to study language. Or, they say lots of different things, but that's not strong enough. That kind of motivation is not strong enough, because if you stop loving the boyfriend, you are not interested in that language anymore. Okay, that it's not a good motivational cause. Okay, and then I'll talk about conclusion. What is optimal input? Okay, comprehensible, compelling, rich, and abundant. This is interesting. This is very good. The number 2, compelling. I used to say to Dr. Krashen, it's difficult to have a compelling material because it's difficult to find one. And I said that interesting is enough, but it isn't. I always come to the conclusion later, he is actually right. And he's always right. It has to be compelling. And I'll tell you why it has to be compelling. Even when it's difficult to find, you've got to find the stories. You've got to find stories that are compelling. Okay, what is comprehensible input? Okay, everybody thinks comprehensible input means you have to understand perfectly everything. That's not true. When I was talking to a teacher like 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago in America, they said, well, Beniko, she said, how much do they understand when they listen to your story? And I said, well, maybe 80%. And she said, that's not good enough. They've got to understand everything. That's comprehensible input. And I thought, no, it isn't. But this, the way how Dr. Krashen explained it here makes a lot of sense. He says it's not necessary for listeners to completely understand every word. It may be enough that they have the feeling that they understood the story. The input can contain a little noise. If the story is compelling, they may not even notice the incomprehensible parts, the noise, and this is so true. Students don't have to understand everything perfectly, okay? So comprehensible input doesn't mean you have to have them understand everything perfectly. Okay, what so in story listening? Okay, we have them understand so, and that's good enough. What is compelling input? This is so important. It means that the story is so interesting, students forget that this is part of a language lesson in a language class. They have to forget it. They have to forget that they are listening in English. Students forget that they are in a language class. When a story is very interesting, the listeners forget that they are listening in English. That is when acquisition is happening, because that is when the affective filter is the lowest. This is the part, it's very important, I think. They've got to have the affective filter the lowest to have the subconscious acquisition. Good preparation is necessary. So I have to be very good. I have to prepare. The teacher chooses a good story for the group. The teacher prepares and rehearses to make the delivery of the story interesting and comprehensible enough for the listeners. And so I've got to find a story that I really, really like to tell. And then I've got to prepare. What is rich input? Rich is rich in content, he said. The story can be a simple story. It could be a short story like 300 words in length, but a genuinely interesting one. And the story is rich in language. In other words, there are lots of words that stimulates your emotions, type of thing. It does not simply focus on a few target items. We're not teaching this word or this structure using this story. That's a completely wrong, I wouldn't say wrong, but a different way from what we do. Rich quality input in story listening. Story listening uses fairy folk tales, and I like to use fairy folk tales. And a lot of teachers, I shouldn't say a lot of, but some teachers have said, why do you use folk tales and fairy tales? That's for children, Or they might have said something like, well, I'm not interested in stories like that. I'm interested in stories in history or cultural story and things like that. But I still use fairy folk tales because they are rich in themes and topics with different characters, with unique problems in different situations. Those people who say, well, I don't want to listen to fairy tales and folk tales, they probably think that the fairy tales and folk tales are Cinderella's and the Three Little Pigs and the Jack and Beanstalk. They are not so. There are lots and lots of stories that has a significant message. So the teller, in story listening, the teller not only delivered the story that she remembered or memorized, the teller describes, explains, and comments using the language that the students already know and the language that they are ready to acquire. And that's why, the language that they are ready to acquire. That's why I say non-native speaker teachers like I, who studied English as a second foreign language in school, probably has a better idea what they don't understand, what they need to understand, type of thing. So, because I cannot teach Japanese when I do story listening, because I have no idea what they don't understand. And so I can do this in English, but I can't do it in Japanese. So the teller describes, explains, and comments using the language that they already know and the language that they are ready to acquire. The language input that the teacher provides automatically includes enough language that they already know and the language that they are ready to acquire during story listening. And I will tell you how it works in a minute, okay? A rich input. Okay, rich input means, for me, it is I+1. This rich input ensures progress. Without rich input, progress stagnates. So, there are lots of impoverished or comprehensible input. If you have the students join the soccer team and teach English at the same time playing soccer, the language that they hear is going to be very restricted. Okay. So the stories contain a lot of chances to acquire language without the input being forced, without the feeling that the language is being repeated. Okay. Now, everybody, if you want to have this, what's this, slides, you can have the copy if you want to. What is abundant input? And oh, I see. Tsutsui-san, you woke up early. I thought you had to work. You had to go to work. Okay. What is an abundant input? An interesting, compelling story will naturally include a great deal of optimal input. Okay, I will explain. Rich in quantity, abundant I+1. Story listening uses comprehension aiding supplementation to make the auditory input comprehensible, interesting, rich, and abundant. When comprehension aiding supplementation is used, input becomes rich in quantity, and CAS means comprehension aiding supplementation. Okay, comprehension aiding supplementation means there are two things. It's a strategy. One is non-linguistic supplementation, and the other is linguistic supplementation. So a lot of people might think, story listening is just telling a story with pictures. It is not so. At the beginning, it might be so for the little children, but gradually, even with the children, we will start using linguistic supplementation. But anyway, non-linguistic supplementation is facial expressions. You're sad or you're angry. You run fast, type of thing. In gestures, slow and clear speech, and drawing. Number 2 is linguistic supplementation. Linguistic supplementation is, as I said earlier, descriptions, explanations, comments, and unrelated short story incited into in a story. Okay. Okay. Linguistic supplementation helps input become abundant input. Okay. Linguistic supplementation makes the input not only comprehensible, interesting, and rich, but also abundant. It provides just the right quantities and automatically review the language they heard before. Story listening is usually about 30 minutes long. When the speech rate is 80 words per minute, the total number of words students hear is in 30 minutes is 2,400 words. 80 words per minute times 30 is 2,400. Now, you know what? I have a colleague who teaches in a junior high school. And I asked him, he uses story listening in junior high school. And I asked him, can you tell me, will you go and observe other teachers? What kind of English language they use in the classroom? And then what he told me was, the other teachers did not use English in the classroom. If they used the English, they would say something like, good morning, everybody. How are you? And they might say, open the book to page 23. Mr. Tanaka, stand up and translate the first paragraph. Something like that. And they would be saying something like that every time. And the students will understand. But that's a very impoverished input. Okay. Example. The origin. Okay, I'm going to explain why story listening makes the language input optimal. Okay, the original sentence in The Fisherman and His Wife by Grimm Brothers, at the beginning of the story it says, there was once a fisherman who lived with his wife in a pigsty close by the seaside. This is a sentence that they have in the Grimm Brothers story, okay? But when I do the story listening, this changes this. Once upon a time, a long time ago, maybe it was about 300 years ago, or maybe it was only 200 years ago. We don't know when, but anyway, it was a long time ago, and it was in Europe, and it was in Germany. There was a man. He was about 65 years old. He was married. See, I'm drawing a picture too. He was married. He had a wife. His wife was also 65 years old. Okay, 65. He was a fisherman. She was a housewife. He was a happy man, but she was not. She was unhappy. She didn't like her house. They lived in a small cabin. It was an old, small house. The house was not only old, but also dirty. It was not only dirty, but also messy. She didn't like to put away things. Their dirty clothes were everywhere. The shirts were on the sofa. The pants were on the floor. The jackets were on chairs. She didn't clean the house. She didn't sweep the floor. She didn't wipe the tables clean. The dishes were dirty. Their small house looked like a house for pigs. Pig house, pigsty. Their dirty house, the pigsty, was close to the sea. They lived in a northern Germany, not southern, but northern. There was a fishing village in northern Germany. Their house was in a fishing village. He caught fish for a living. His job was to catch fish. He went to the sea every day to catch fish at the seaside. He went every day to the seaside to fish. I don't know if I will say this much, but something like that. I would explain. I will introduce the story to the students, because this story is going to be like, his wife doesn't like her house. She wants to live in a beautiful cottage, and then she wants to live in a beautiful house, and then she wants to live in a beautiful castle and things like that. And she goes to her husband goes to the sea and talks to a flounder and asks this special flounder to give her the wish, type of thing. So this is what I do for the Sory-Listening text analysis. Okay, this, the story I just said, explanation and description, it's about 247 words. 96.8% were within the most frequent first 2,000 words. 1 academic word, job. 6 off-list words, cabin, messy, jackets, pants, sofa, pigsty. These were the off-list words. Okay, so but the students, the students who understand pigsty, when they remember what pigsty is. Okay, what is story listening? Story listening uses universal interest. We plan sessions, natural repetition, no forced output. The students are not asked questions, no asked to say anything, no targeting. We don't teach them this and that. No test, no assigned homework. Isn't that nice? I think the students will love it. Universal interest, and then they do this and they get better in the language. Okay, universal interest. To make sure that the stories are interesting to all students, we need to use stories that are not excessively connected to one culture, one group. That's what it means. If my colleague said, well, I don't want to listen to folk tales and fairy tales. I want to listen to historical stories. Well, maybe he does, but maybe I don't want to tell a historical story. Maybe other students may not want a historical story. But, stories, when you talk about people, once upon a time there was this woman who was jealous of her husband or whatever, then people listen because it's a universal interest. Okay, jealousy and things like that are universal interest. Story listening, oops, what did I do wrong? Oops. Okay, no assigned homework. Story listening uses folk tales and fairy tales. Okay. Planned sessions. This is also, I would like to stress. Story listening is story listening is planned in terms of an interesting storyline and comprehensibility. Story listening is not planned with respect to certain vocabulary and grammar, but I would like to stress that story listening is planned. I try to tell the story as much as I think I can do for them to understand. Okay. Natural repetition. We don't have to worry about a word is repeated enough times for acquisition. We acquire meanings of words gradually, a little each time we read or hear it in a comprehensible context. The stories contain a lot of chances to acquire language without the input being forced, without the feeling that the language is being repeated. You know, people used to think that it's only words and structure, and it is not so. When you're listening to a story, because I draw a picture and the words on the board, students see the spelling, they hear the pronunciation, they hear the accent, they hear lots of different aspects of the language. And so it's not just words and structure, grammar, okay? It will return in another story. And then if it's important, it will return in another story. And if not, it was probably not important. Don't worry about it, he says. Natural review, and I think so too. Natural review without artificial repetition. Okay, they hear or read the same high-frequency words many times in different stories or books. Roughly 85% of the words used in any written text is among the first 2,000 high-frequency words. Among fairy tales and folk tales, often 95% of the words are written within the first 2,000 high-frequency words. But 5% of the words used in the texts are low-frequency and academic words, and which is good because 95%, 98% of the words that they understand, that's what we want, because we want them to comprehend. For example, the Star Money, one of the Grimm's fairy tales, has 337 words in length. Almost 96% are within the 2,000 high-frequency words. But there are 13 out of 337 words are off-list words. Okay? These high-frequency words and many of the low-frequency words are used in other stories, often enough for acquisition to take place. It's very true. Grimm's fairy tales use a lot of the same words. And so in different stories, we use same words. No forced output. Students are not required to speak at all. Speaking ability will emerge gradually from listening and reading and cannot be rushed. Okay, speech emerges on its own. See, this is another thing I love when I read Dr. Krashen's all the books and papers. This is what he said. Natural consequences of the input hypothesis is a speech emerges on its own. So speaking is the result of acquisition and not its cause. Speech cannot be taught directly, but emerges on its own as a result of building competence via comprehensible input or optimal input. The language teacher need not attempt deliberately to teach the next structure along the natural order, because it happens all naturally. No targeting. There is no attempt to aim our efforts on rules or vocabulary one at a time. Given optimal input, they will be acquired in a predictable order. Nor should we worry when they will be mastered. No accountability. Yeah, lots of teachers ask me, Benigo, we need to teach present tense. What story should we use? We need to teach past tense. What story do we use? No, that's not the way how we do it. Because the Three Little Pigs, there are already past tenses. Once upon a time, there were three little pigs, and there's still already the three little pigs, plural form. And then the ordinal number, the first little pig, the second little pig, the third little pig, and 1, 2, 3 little pigs, numbers, lots of things are, it's included in one story. You can't just target. Okay. No textbook, no targeting. Teaching from a textbook forces students to learn in the order in which the textbook was designed. After completing chapter 3, not everyone is ready to understand what chapter 4 has to offer. Story listening students need the freedom to acquire whatever they are ready to acquire from listening to a story that they understand and enjoy. For example, this could include vocabulary, intonation, spelling, and grammar. When students are consciously paying attention to the targeted language, they will lose the chance to acquire the language that they are ready to acquire. We are robbing their chances to acquire what they want to acquire when we tell them what to learn. Students don't have to focus on the consciously master, I don't know what it says, necessary words, necessary words and grammar. Okay. I really love this unconscious self-selection. This is what the brain does when it needs to do it. If the teacher demands that students consciously memorize specific vocabulary or grammar, the unconscious self-selection becomes impossible and hinders acquisition. Story listening, GSSR, does not include detailed questions about the content of the story or the content of the book. Thus, the listener's brain freely selects, or brain or whatever, selects and understands the necessary words and the content of the story. Story is given in a natural way. For example, if the Three Little Pigs was told, the present tense, past tense, and future tenses are included. Numbers, ordinal numbers, plural forms of nouns, colors, conversational expressions, the imperative mood, animal names, carpentry tools, materials for building a house, cooking utensils, parts of a dwelling, etc., would appear in one story. It's so rich. The same is true with reading easy readers. Even when the readers are graded readers, they have restrictions on the grammar and vocabulary. They have it, but there are always off-list words used in graded readers. Okay, so no confirmation tests. The teacher does not know what the listeners will acquire from listening to this story. For example, in vocabulary acquisition, some students may be interested in carpentry tools. Other students may be attracted to ordinal numbers. However, when the students take the confirmation vocabulary test later, the carpentry tools may not be included on the test. Hindrances for language acquisition. The activities done before, during, and after a story become hindrances for language acquisition. Pre-teaching of vocabulary or grammar, questioning the content of the story, speaking and writing activities, corrective feedback, conscious targeting of the language items to repeat. These activities reveal students' weaknesses unfairly and can cause anxiety. No assigned homework. If the students find the reading material comprehensible and highly interesting, they will voluntarily read it and listen to it, or listen to a story. If they don't, we need to improve the material. You see, when we tell a story, and there are many, many students, I used to teach at a university, and then the university gives the placement test to the incoming students, and they always gave me the lowest level students. And so I had the lower level students, and then so obviously they did not like English, and they read books. No way, they didn't read books. But when I started telling stories, and it took a long time. For some students, it took like for 3 semesters, which means they had to listen about 45, 60, or to 50 stories. And then they start reading. And so some students are very quickly improve, but story listening is a conduit to reading. That I am convinced of it. Optimal story listening. Find interesting, good stories. The teacher needs to like the story too. Collect many stories. Prepare a prompter to help you make the story optimal input. Decide on appropriate casts according to the listeners. Enjoy telling the story. So the teller, I have to enjoy too. Reduce obstacles. No output. I'm saying the same thing, but there will be more time for optimal input. So if we do our output, then we won't have enough time to give them an optimal input. No daily or weekly tests. Make it easy but optimal. Pleasant experience lead to motivation. Oh yeah, this is important. When they listen to a story and they forget that they're listening in English, and they like the story, and that they don't mind coming to the class to listen to another story. And if this happens many times, and then they start reading, and when they read books which they understand and enjoy, they feel good about themselves, and they don't mind reading more. And so this causes motivation. The pleasant experience leads to motivation, not the conscious motivation, like, I want to go to America, I want to become good in English, I want to get a high TOEIC scores, I want to have an American boyfriend. Those things are not that's a very superficial motivation. Okay, so we're almost done. Review. What is optimal instruction? It assumes that we acquire only from input, not from output. Optimal input contains more than some comprehensible input. It has to be, a lot of things. It lowers the affective filter. This is very important. It must lower the affective filter, because when the affective filter is up, the input won't come in. It will shut up the input that they are ready to acquire. Review. What supports optimal input to lower the affective filter? Universally interesting stories. So let's tell interesting stories. When we tell a story about loyalty, when we tell stories about deception, when we tell stories about revenge, they listen. Universally interesting stories, okay? Planned lessons, we gotta plan it. We cannot just go in and tell a story because we know the language, and it doesn't work that way. Natural repetition, okay? There is a natural repetition. We tell them different stories. No forced output. We don't tell them to talk. No targeting, no test, no assigned homework. Okay. Story listening is a bridge to reading. Story listening is a solution for reluctant readers. This is true. I have witnessed it. Reluctant readers can become good readers when we do story listening and gradually lead them to good books. When students listen to many stories in the story listening way, they develop high competency in listening, and their vocabulary size increases. Increased competency in listening and vocabulary helps them when they read. After listening to many interesting stories and reading interesting books each time, students will want to read even more interesting books and will search for them in the library. 3 stages for story listening and GSSR. The first stage is pre-GSSR. It's almost like a 90% story listening. Like I said, some students, even the college students, they don't like to read. And so I don't force them. They don't have to read, but they have to come to class and listen to stories. And so they listen. Okay, so 90% story listening. And sometimes I go to the library and read the books aloud for them. Stage 2, full GSSR. 50% story listening. This means if you have a 90-minute class, you spend 45 minutes for story listening, and you spend 45 minutes for reading, and the students take some books home. Stage 3, post GSSR. This one, they still listen to stories. They still listen to stories. Lots of people think story listening is for children and kindergarten people. But no, story listening is for senior citizens. And story listening can be done for middle-aged people because there are lots of stories suitable for those people. And so you do that for story listening, yeah? And then after listening to many interesting stories and reading interesting books each time, students will want to read. My student told me she spent 2 semesters just listening. She didn't want to read. This is not senior citizen, but middle-aged student. She said she just listened to my stories. Like I tell three stories in 90-minute long. So if they come 10 weeks long, they listen to like 60 stories, yeah, in 1 year. If the semester was 10-week long, 10 week, yeah. And she told me after listening to 60 stories, she began to feel better about reading, she said. And I don't, it's just a subjective observation, so I cannot use it, whatever. Oral presentation or anything, but that's what she said. Did I tell you this? I did this, didn't I? Okay. Why support a delayed gratification approach to language education? The comprehension hypothesis is consistent with empirical research. The skill building hypothesis is not. The comprehension hypothesis allows immediate gratification. That is, interesting and comprehensible input from the beginning. That's why it's very important on the first day you tell a story that they understand and they enjoy. Okay. The skill building hypothesis is a delayed gratification approach. Nevertheless, researchers continue to search for evidence for skill building, and practitioners are reluctant to provide more comprehensible input in their classrooms. Yeah, lots of people say, well, listening is not enough. How do you know? I think, why don't you try? Immediate success and pleasure lead to more reading. Yeah, so like Dr. Krashen says, immediate success is very important. Slowly listening GSSR aims at that students experience success each time they listen to a story and they read a book. When they continue experiencing success and pleasure, they cannot help but get better in understanding the foreign language. And then they feel good about themselves. This leads to high self-esteem and more interest in reading. Conclusion. Input is the cause of language acquisition and not output. When teachers use stories to fit the textbook schedule, it doesn't work. The magic disappears. Unconscious acquisition means that they acquire grammar and vocabulary from understanding without intending to acquire them. The brain self-selects what it needs to make sense of the input. The constant focus on form prevents a focus on understanding. Right? The constant focus on form prevents a focus on understanding. Okay, prevents a whole focus on understanding the message and prevents language acquisition from taking place. Slowly listening GSSR method removes barriers to language acquisition, okay, because it's easy. Okay, so these are the sources, these are the people who talk about the same thing. And this is the website, Slowly Listening and Theory course. This is a website QR code. And Slowly Listening YouTube channel, this is a QR code. And thank you. This is all. And I would like to receive some questions. Yay! Thank you. Don't you think it's good? I think, this is the answer. And we got to go into this direction if we want if we want our students to be happy and become successful. And if we want to become successful as a teacher, this is the way we should go. That's what I believe. Don't you think?
Definitely.
Okay. So you teach already using story listening, so you really understand how effective it is.
Yes. In fact, I'll be teaching 2 classes this afternoon.
Oh.
Using stories. So.
Japanese.
Yeah. It's an intermediate listening class.
Yeah. I would like you to videotape yourself and send it to me.
Okay.
Japanese story listening.
Okay.
I'm sure there are lots of people who are interested in learning Japanese, and in this way they can learn Japanese with ease, not with difficulty. I think
Mm-hmm.
those are everybody. Everybody. I don't know how many people there are, but ask me questions.
I have one question. It's
Okay.
about the drawing. Is there any
Um,
advice you can give us to get started with the artwork or
oh, sure.
storytelling?
Yeah, sure. You know, I have a course for the people who want to start using story listening, and I talk about how to prepare and what to do with drawing. But the reason why I made a course is because I don't think I can tell everything when I give a talk like this, and so I made a course. But anyway, when you do draw, when you draw, the first thing you have to remember is that it doesn't matter if your drawing is not very good. They don't care. They will be happy that you give them the support for them to understand. And so they don't. Lots of people say, "Well, I'm not very good at drawing." No, just prepare a little bit. What you have to draw is not. You don't have to draw everything. It's not a movie. And so what you need to draw is the characters, Tojo Jimbos, the people who appear in the story and what they do, if they run or they walk, or in the places. Are they going to the forest? Are they living in a house? Or, they are living in a cave? Or and so it's not that much you have to do. There is always a bed, the person who is sick, who is sleeping on a bed and he is dying type of thing. So there are not that many variations. And so you can start you can start doing story listening, and then you will see you don't have to draw everything, and it's not that difficult. Okay, is that what you wanted to hear? Okay. Yeah, and
Yes, thank
also,
you.
yeah, so the students are not expecting you to be a cartoonist. They know, but you have to tell them at the beginning of the course at the orientation that what are you going to do? You're going to tell stories, and you have to tell them, I'm going to tell you stories, but don't complain. Like my colleague, I don't want to hear a story and fairy tales. Don't complain, because it is only a means to the end. I'm trying to provide you as much optimal input as possible. And so, because this fairy tales and folk tales has a different characters, different problems, different situations, different themes, and so there are lots of words which you can learn. And so this is the way how you tell them. And then you also, when they say something, it's not interesting. Well, maybe it may not be all that interesting sometimes, but be patient, things like that. And also, but you don't have to tell them, I'm sorry, I'm not a very good a painter type of thing. Don't apologize. I don't apologize. You just tell them, I draw pictures for you, and I hope it is going to be helpful for you, And so I don't, lots of teachers say, students laugh at my drawings. Why? Why do they laugh at your drawings? They cannot laugh at your drawings. You're trying your best to teach them. That's not nice, And so you have to tell them at the beginning, this is what I'm doing, and this is because I want you to get better, and this is the way how you can get better the fastest. And so I'm going to tell a story, and I'm going to draw pictures. But even when the story is not that interesting, be patient and stuff like that. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I would like to, first of all, I'd like to add a comment to the drawing thing. I really agree with you, what you said about first explaining to the students
Yeah.
what you'll be doing, because I think, at least in my case, the students are completely not used to this method. Like, I mean, it's completely different from what they have done for 18 or 20 years in their education. And so I think it's really helpful to explain to them, the concepts, the basic concepts of language acquisition, and that the reason that you are doing that is to help them acquire the language. I found that that's very helpful to build a classroom culture, And then the other thing I wanted to add about the drawing is that I have actually found it helpful to make fun of my own drawings. And to not expect that the students will think that it's good, and just make some comments like, her hands are way too big, or something like that, so that it's not, it kind of serves to break the tension a little bit.
I think it's a good idea to draw very quickly. You should not take time to draw quiet, slowly. Just draw quickly. And sometimes when I draw quickly, the horses don't look like horses. And so, I might laugh about that. This is a horse type of thing. But, you don't turn your head back to the students and start drawing. That's not a good idea. When you do a story listening, you look at the students and you draw very quickly. Okay.
So, and I wanted to ask one question too, in addition to the comments. I wanted to ask, because you were talking about using fairy tales and folk tales, and I think, that the themes are very good in the fairy tales. And I think that one thing that I have done a little bit that seems to make the stories a little bit more appetizing to some of the students is to like modernize the story a little bit. Just to reset it like in modern day. Use the same story, but kind of adapt it a little bit.
If that's what students like, and then of course you can do anything you want. But I always followed the fairy tales. Fairy tales and folk tales, they are, not just a little children's story. It's for adults. So, it's okay to use those stories. So I don't know. I think that's okay.
Hey, Dr. Mason, can you hear me here?
Sure.
All right, I'm a beginner to story listening, and I've just been kind of self-learning and from your YouTube videos, and I have a colleague I learned about it from, Ben Rose.
Ben Rose, yes.
Yeah. So I've just been trying to pick his brain a little bit on it. So I guess a couple questions. First, how do you go about explaining to your students at the beginning of the semester? It would be beneficial to someone like me to understand, like maybe on a YouTube video you could do it on how you go about explaining to your students what you're going to do, the whole process of going through with them. That would be great for me to understand, because I've already started with a lot of my students, but every year there's new students. And by the way, I'm here in Taiwan, elementary school level.
Did you say you can? You need to explain to the kids, and also you need to explain to the parents. Tell them that this is the way how we're doing. The reason why we're doing it is because this is the best way, or better way than the ones that we have been using, and we have evidence for it. Okay, and so and then you have to look for evidences. You can go to my webpage, or you can go to Dr. Class's webpage, and you can see evidences. But you can tell that orientation is very important. Or just because you did orientation doesn't mean they will listen and they will read. They will listen when the story is comprehensible and interesting. They will read when the story is understandable and interesting. Not just because it is the best way. They won't do that. But when they, without knowing, they get better and better and better. And then when they remember the evidence and the theory and the methods, they remember those things, and then they become more convinced of the methodology. And so I think it's a good idea to tell the teachers. Oh, in fact, I have a story listening and story reading description, which is written Chinese.
Okay.
If you want to, you can go to my webpage, and this is a handout, I think, section. Story listening, I cannot remember. Letter to parents. And it talks about what story listening is, what story reading is, and things like that, so that the parents will understand what it is. It will help without knowing anything about it. I think it will help. But
You say this
Dr.
is on your
Krasny,
website? Sorry.
sorry.
You say this is on your website?
Yes, right. And Dr. Grassin corrected, made some changes. And so we'll have to redo it, just the last part. But it's an old version, and it's not quite right, maybe, but it's almost right. And so you can still use it, I think, in Chinese. We got one in Hungarian, we got one in, is that Hungarian, Dutch, and Polish, Spanish, French, English, and Japanese. So if you have students, parents who are in that language, who speaks those languages, you can have those handout.
So Brendan,
welcome to have it.
This is Chris. I'm helping Dr. Mason, manage this website. That's why my name shows up as hers here too. But
okay.
I think that actually is that topic is something that Dr. Mason just had. So we'll make that available, on this site too soon. It could also come up as a topic. This is kind of this new platform that we've opened up, the community. So it could also be, you could bring it up as a topic of the community too, and we could post it inside this this community section as well. So look, I think so. We'll put that at the top, higher up on the list to get that out to you.
Right.
Great, thank you.
Right. I have many, many things that I can give you. So to do story listening, yes, I'd like you to do story listening. I don't want to say, if I say things like that, people might get angry, but I'd like you guys to do in the right way. There are a lot of people start doing this and that, and I would like them to, because the reason why I say that is because I've made mistakes. For the last 30 years, I did different ways, and I made mistakes. And the research showed the way how I was doing was not right. And so I gradually corrected them. And that's why I want people to do it the right way.
Oh, I think we lost Dr. Mason. Not sure what happened. She might have clicked the wrong button there. But Sonia, did you have a question? If she doesn't get back on, I can note your question and we can, get back to you with it.
Yeah, a couple of things. One sort of administrative about the slides. She mentioned that we could access the slides. Is that also on the website?
What we can do is, she said she would make those available, so we can have those emailed, or kind of, we'll make them available on this community page. So I think we can probably make it as a download, or to the people that attended, we could send it out. Also, this presentation, I think it will show up. This is the first time we're doing this on this, so
Dr. Grassin says don't do it. I was doing it.
Danica, you dropped off there for a moment. I'm not sure what happened.
Oh, what did I do?
Oh, I think somehow you got disconnected for a little bit, but you're back.
Okay.
But Sonia had a question about, you mentioned that the slides that you presented could be made available to this later. So I was telling her that we can make them available here on this website in the community section.
Mm-hmm.
Also, I think this recording of this will be available if you come back to the same page, you can come and look at this recording as well.
Gee, I hope I didn't say anything inappropriate.
So this is the first time we're using this platform, in this presentation. So hoping it works out well for new future discussions that we can have. Oh, looks like we lost her again real quick. Not sure if she has connections issues or not.
I was also going to ask a question about assessment. So yeah, that's something I'm curious about too. Seems a bit of a dirty word when it comes to story listening, but I have constraints where I teach that I'm required to assess students.
Yes, that would be a question for Dr. Mason. She can address that. She has a way of doing assessments, kind of think at the end of that. I don't know, Cade, you might have more of a response for that.
Yeah, I know what I've read, some things from Dr. Mason's writings is that she has the students write summaries in English or in Japanese of this. So they're writing in their language that they're comfortable with. So it's not like they're trying to output. But then she's able to gauge the amount of comprehension that they had and use that also for assessment. Have them write some, parts that they found interesting or whatever. And so, but maybe now that she's back, she can.
So Dr. Mason, you dropped off again for a moment there, but Sonia Morrison had a question about, how you do assessments.
Oh, good idea. Good question. Okay, assessment.
Thank you. Yes, sorry, I teach at a primary school, so I have young students, and we are required to assess them each semester. And I love the way that you explain your teaching, and I try and do something similar, but I also am forced to assess them. So I'm interested to know how you assess, what you recommend.
Yes. I was teaching at a university, and I had to give them grades too. So. But if your students can write in their native language, are they American students?
Australian students.
Australian students studying Spanish?
Japanese.
Oh, Japanese. Wow.
Great. So is. Oh, she's gone. Oh.
Sorry for the technical problem here. Let me try reaching her.
It's back. But you're on mute. Mason Sensei, you're on mute.
If are you, Chris, I'm going to talk, okay? Okay. if your students still, or even when they are still in elementary school, if they could write in in English, they can write. If they're not first grade or second grade, they should be able to write something. And so they asked them to write a summary or what they understood the story in English. Okay, how old are they?
From 5 years till 12 years.
5 years. Five
Yes.
years, I don't know if you can do that. But for the 12-year-old kids, or from 10 years old to 12 year, I think you can do it. For 5 years old, maybe what you can do is you can just ask them if they understood, out of 5, how much do you think you understood, and how much do you enjoyed, and have them write down a number 5 and the smile mark, and see whether they understood it or not. Yeah, and then
I love that. How much did you enjoy it? That's so
yeah,
important, isn't it?
yeah. When they enjoyed it, that means they understood it. So how much did you enjoy? Yeah, and then tell them that. Okay, so in that. Okay, let's see. When you have this feedback from them, you keep them in a file for each student, each child. And then your story becomes longer. It's not always 10-minute long. It becomes 20-minute long, 30-minute long, 40-minute long type of thing. And then when they understood everything at the end of the semester, that means they understood. They improved. Yeah. So and if for the older students, have them write it in English. And what happens is that it's very, very good. It can be the feedback to you. You will know when you read this, the summary, you'll know where you did wrong. When they misunderstood, maybe that was not their fault. Maybe that was my fault because I forgot to say an important event. I forgot to say an important word. And so they got confused. And so they misunderstood. And so it's a good idea to have them write a summary in English, their native language, and then you look at them, and then you can decide how you can improve your teaching next time. So this will be a formative evaluation for the kids, but also formative evaluation for yourself. And at the end of the semester, tell them, I'm going to tell you a very interesting story, but this is going to be a very long story, and I hope you will understand it, or something. And then you just tell them an interesting story for, I don't know how many minutes you have in one class, but long story, and have them write a summary of it. And then you'll be surprised how much they can remember and write, because they've got this memory, images in their head. So they will start tracing back to the memories, and so they write the summary from the memory, imagined memories. So I was often very not surprised, but how do you say, impressed when students understood such a little detail when I even tried it. Like if I say something like that she was wearing the apron. This apron had a blue bird and a yellow sunflower and something like that. Yeah, I describe about this embroidery on the apron, and then my students will write everything like that, and then that makes you feel. It made me feel so good. But if they don't, that's okay too.
That's very helpful. ありがとうございました。
はい、どういたしまして。
I would like to ask also kind of a related question, or ask your opinion about this, because here we're talking about foreign language situation where the students have a common language, English, or in your case, Japanese. In my case, because I'm teaching foreign students in a JSL environment, I have many different languages, and I have my students write summaries also, but they tend to want to write them in Japanese because that's their lingua franca. And so I've made the summaries, I've made them very short, and I tell them, don't try hard to write, good Japanese or something like that. Just write the summary simply, because it's not, you're not going to be graded on how good your Japanese was. And so I think that that's helped a little bit, but I wonder if you have a suggestion for where there's a mixed, you know, group of people with different languages, something.
Right. If you have different, you know, foreign students in your class, and if you're teaching Japanese, you won't be able to read Indian language or Pakistan language, you know.
Right.
And so I think you almost have to have them, you know, ask them to write it in Japanese, or if they can. And if they can't yet, then they maybe, like I was talking to the professor there in Australia, you can, you know, have them say out of 5, you know, 10 out of 10, how much did you understand, or did you like, how did you like the story, and have them write the nico nico card, nico nico なんだっけ face.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
I have one more question, if you don't mind. I think it was Cade that had mentioned something about modifying stories, modernizing them. About how do you go about modifying stories to make them more, you know, applicable or interesting, compelling for your students? What's your process for that?
Are you asking me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I would say, you know, when you read a story, there are many hundreds, thousands of, you know, millions of stories out there on the internet. And when you know, start reading, there are stories that include something that's not all that necessary. And then you just delete them. Or if it's not a, I delete them. If you asked me, how can you modify the story? Yeah. Okay. Yes. Okay. For the young children, how do we modify a story? Okay. Like when the story, it's very important for the story to be predictable. Students, you know, especially when the students are young, or at the beginning level, the story is it's a good idea. The story is predictable story. They can guess what's going to happen next. And so when the story if story ends unpredictable way, that is not a good story. So you just change it. For example, there is a story called The Golden Key in Grimm Brothers Fairy Tales. And then the little child finds a box under the ground in the snow, and he's going to open it, but the story is not going to tell you what he found it. But I'm going to tell the students he found gold and silver, because it's much easier for them to understand than, let's see what happened to him. You know, let's see what he found. We will not find until he opens up the door, opens up the box. Things like that will be very difficult. And so you change it to make it more comprehensible, I think. Okay?
Thank you. Yes, thank you. I appreciate it.
You know what? At the beginning, it is a good idea to tell easy, predictable story. But when the students become better and better and better, and in fact, they get better very quickly, then we want this is another phrase that Dr. Grassen came up with. He's very good at this. Optimal unpredictability. You know, he says, students, when they are at the higher level, they enjoy unpredictability. When the story ends in a very unpredictable way, they enjoy it. And so something like that, you know, you have to adapt, you have to change while you're teaching little ones and in the beginning level to intermediate and advanced people. You know, I don't want to do this, but I used to tell Shakespeare's stories rewritten by Mary and Charles Lamb, and the text itself is like 5,000 words, or more than 5,000 words in length. And there are lots, like 40 or 50 academic words in it. And it's very difficult. But I used to tell those stories. I've got 10 stories. I told 10 stories out of those Mary and Charles Lamb's rewritten stories of Shakespeare plays. And what happened was students love it because they're adults, 75-year-old, 65-year-old, they love it. I don't know. And then when I say this to people, they are not, some people say something like, oh, very good. Do you use Shakespeare in English to tell the story? And I go, no, no. I just say, once upon a time, there was a man, and his name was Prospero. He lived in Milan, type of thing. And so it's just a regular story. But the regular language, the language that I can use, but the twists and peaks and turns and of the Shakespeare story is so interesting that the adults understand, like it. Okay, so I wish you would do that too. You would start telling such stories too. And when I said that, some people said like, "Oh, I tell Shakespeare stories to children." Well, that's okay too, children, but well, I don't know. I tell that only to advanced students because I spend a lot of hours preparing. I'm serious, like 3-4 days, pick up the words and look them up in a dictionary and find out the pronunciation. And I go to the internet and hear the pronunciation spoken by the native speaker so that I won't make a mistake. Lots and lots of things that I have to do when I tell stories like that. But it's rewarding because students love it. And when they go, oh, so happy.
Thank you, Dr. Mason. I appreciate it. Yeah, I've told, I started doing story listening about a year ago, and the best is when they all clap at the end, right? They all love it and clap. That makes me know that I did a pretty good job.
Yes. Both rewarding. The students like it. We enjoy it. Yeah. Wonderful.
I guess if no one else has a question, I can hop in with another. Sorry, I'm loaded with questions.
Oh, don't.
Sorry, I wrote it down so I didn't forget. So what if, for example, I know like you mentioned, don't teach according to like textbook, like grammar and vocabulary, right? And I don't. But what if like the topics kind of overlap? The topic in the story overlaps with the topic that they're covering in their textbook unit with the local teachers.
Well, such as?
So for example, my 6th grade students in their textbooks with the local English teachers have been going over clothing, and I mean their sentence pattern is how much is the shirt, how much is the dress, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I don't do that, but I told the story. It's called "Animals Should Definitely Not Wear Clothing." And then so I did that story listening style, and so the whole point is, like a porcupine should not wear a t-shirt because it'll make holes in his t-shirt, and the elephant should definitely not, or the goat should not wear tie because he'll think it's too delicious and will eat it, et cetera, things like that. So I go over like, not necessarily, I'm not targeting necessarily the specific vocabulary and grammar from their textbook, but it does overlap a little bit. Is that okay? Okay.
Yeah, that's what Ben teaches that way. So Ben teaches junior high school kids, yeah, in simple stories. But Ben read one of the papers, and he said he was giving a pre-test before he gave a story listening, and he gives a post-test to see whether students learned any words, and then give them a delayed post-test to find out how much they remember after 2 weeks, type of thing. And that's not a good idea. I think I told him I do that for the research purpose, but not for the everyday lesson, for the weekly lesson. Yeah, I think I told
Great.
you.
I haven't started that, so I won't start it. Thank you.
Yeah. The reason why I'm telling you this is because I used to do this. I used to do this for about 10 years. I gave a test and I wrote the words on the board and I told a story pointing at the words. And then after the story, I gave them a test again. And I saw the gains from pre and post test. And oh, was I happy to see their scores went 4 to 25, you know? But that's not a good idea because their affect filter goes up. They think that they have to listen to, they have to read, they have to learn these words. They are not given the freedom to learn, to acquire whatever they want to acquire. And so that's not a good idea. I used to do that, you see, but it's not a good idea. Dr. Gratian told me, don't do it. It was in 2003. I used to do that since 1990. Yeah, so for 10 years I was doing that. And he told me, don't do it. So that's what I would like to tell teachers, you know. I'm sure because I was trained in a traditional way, and everybody is. And so we think we should do it this way. It's a good idea to have them review type of thing. But it isn't. If they're not ready to acquire, even when they review it, because they didn't understand it, it's not going to make any difference. Isn't that strange? Isn't that interesting? Yeah. It's not going to make any difference. So it's the best that you just freely listen to stories and read books.
I have a question, I guess, along those lines. So when you're telling a story and there's, you know, like an abstract idea, like being kind, a bit of an abstract idea that you can't really draw, right? And so, like, what if I ask a question like, oh, what does that mean to be kind? Like, ask for them for like a Chinese translation, something like that. It's not a good idea.
You know, you can use translation sometimes too as a last resort, but when you want to say, you want to explain about a kind, that's a good question. What I do is I call it a comment, a story within a story. You should read a paper, Foundations of Story Listening. What I do is I make up another story, what kind is. And, you know, kind person. It's even the little children understand the concept of kind or, you know, cruel or nasty, right? They understand a lot of different abstract ideas. And so what we do is we just give them examples about what a kind person is. And we say he is a very kind. So you draw a picture of it, and you say he's a very kind person. And then you can give you another example. Say this person is not very kind. He is unkind, not kind, unkind, not nice, type of thing. And then you can teach unkind and kind and nice and not nice and yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, that helps a lot to modify a bit in my instruction.
But, you know, sometimes it's a good idea to just give a translation because you don't want to spend the time. Sometimes, according to the students, you know, they may not be able to take that much input, you know, to take that much explanation. And when I start explaining, they may not want to hear it, you know, maybe just too much. They may not have the stamina to listen that much. And then I just give them a translation. So it depends.
So you would say it kind of depends on the flow of the story and how they're accepting the story. Okay. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Sure. Okay. That was interesting.
Shall we close this session and we can plan for the next one?
Yeah, I can come up with the next slides.
Great. Okay, well, thanks everyone for joining, and please, if you send appreciate any feedback on the platform or how things went, so we can make any adjustments for future events.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it. Yeah.
Thank you for taking the time to do this.
Oh no, thank you. I'm glad that people are interested in this. Okay, should I say goodbye? Yeah.
Yes.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hope to see you again. Hope to see you soon somewhere. In Taiwan or in Tokyo or...
Yes, I was sad that I couldn't meet you in Taipei when you went. I'm about the farthest away from Taipei as I can get and still be in Taiwan. So I appreciate you coming to share this later on after the fact. Thank you.
I would love to come to Taiwan. Okay.
Oh, Dr. Mason, Mr. Toru Suzuki has a question, I think.
Okay.
Oh no, you're on mute here. You're on mute.
鈴木さん、ミュートになってるよ。マイクが。
Oh, sorry. I'm not used to this thing, computer thing. I'm sorry.
It's okay. You said you were working this morning.
Oh, yes. It's the day of today.
Oh, okay.